You've just finished the window over the kitchen sink. You've used half a bottle of the blue stuff doing it, and you step back and the glass looks perfect. Then the sun moves an hour later, and there they are. The same gray smears running corner to corner in the same direction your arm was going. And the window looks worse than it did before you started. So you go at it again with a fresh cloth, and this time you get a slightly different set of streaks in a slightly different direction, and somewhere in there you decide that either you're doing it wrong or the cloth is no good. It's neither, and I want to say that plainly before anything else, because a great many people have quietly concluded they're bad at cleaning windows when the actual problem was handed to them in a bottle. Rebecca has washed the windows in this house every spring for 20 years, and she'll tell you the same thing, which is that the year she stopped buying window cleaner was the year the windows started coming clean. Now, I've put a $3 powder in the title of this one, and before we go a step further, I owe you a correction, because I don't care to start a video by stretching the truth. The powder is cornstarch. It costs about $2 a box in the baking aisle, and it will last you several years at the amounts involved, so the number is honest as far as it goes. What isn't honest is the word every, and it isn't honest to suggest the powder does the job on its own either, because cornstarch is one of 4 things in this mix, and the other 3 matter just as much. There's also one surface I tell you to keep this well away from entirely, which I'll come to properly later on, so the word every was doing some work in that title it hadn't quite earned. What I can tell you is that this mix costs somewhere under 70 cents to make. It cleans glass better than anything I've bought in a bottle, and I'll give you the arithmetic later, so you can check it rather than taking my word for it. I'm Jacob Miller, and if this is your first time here, I grew up in a plain community in Holmes County, Ohio, where you fixed what broke and made what you could rather than buying it new every time it ran out. My wife Rebecca runs the pantry and garden side of things when I point you her way, and my brother Samuel handles anything with wings or too many legs. But today it's windows, and windows are a job that comes round in every house, whether you've got 5 people in it or 1. I'm going to show you why glass streaks in the first place and why it's almost never your fault, what's actually in the blue bottle, the 4 things I mix instead, and the exact ratio, and the reason the cloth in your hand matters more than the liquid in your bottle. I'll also give you the trick for cleaning a window the sun is sitting on, what to do about the hard water film on the outside glass, and the surface where I'd tell you plainly to leave all of this alone. So let's start with why glass streaks, because once you see it the rest of this becomes obvious. Glass is about as smooth a surface as exists in an ordinary house, which means it holds almost nothing, and anything left behind on it is sitting right on top in a thin layer with nothing at all to hide in, which is why glass shows up a poor cleaning job more mercilessly than any other surface in the house, and why a countertop forgives what a window never will. A streak is not dirt that failed to come off. A streak is residue that got put on, and 9 times out of 10 it's residue from the cleaner itself, because most glass cleaners contain a surfactant to help lift grease, and that surfactant has to end up somewhere when the water evaporates. Add to that the film from every previous cleaning that never fully came away, the minerals in whatever water was in the mix, and quite often a softener coating in the cloth you're wiping with, and you've got 3 or 4 layers of residue that a wet cloth simply rearranges into lines. That's the whole mystery, and it's why cleaning harder makes it worse rather than better, since more product means more residue, and more rubbing means more evenly distributed residue. Now here's what's in the blue bottle, and it's a short list. Water, first, and by a wide margin. Usually well over 90% of what you carry home and pay to have shipped across the country, which is worth pausing on for a moment, because it means the freight bill on a pallet of window cleaner is very nearly a freight bill on water in decorative bottles. Then a small amount of a solvent, either isopropyl alcohol or ammonia, which is the part that actually evaporates fast and cuts through greasy fingerprints. Then a surfactant to help lift soil, a dye to make it blue because clear liquid doesn't look like a product, and a fragrance so it smells like a thing you bought. The alcohol is doing the real work, the surfactant is doing some work and leaving residue as its fee, and the dye and the fragrance are doing nothing whatsoever except making the bottle feel worth $4. Here's what you'll need instead, and you very likely have 3 of the 4 in the house right now. Plain white distilled vinegar, the ordinary 5% cooking kind, which cuts mineral film and greasy residue and costs $3 or $4 a gallon. And a gallon bought once will outlast a full year of window washing with a good deal left over for the rest of the house. Rubbing alcohol, The isopropyl sort from the pharmacy shelf at 70%, which runs $2 or $3 a bottle, and is the ingredient that makes this dry fast enough not to streak. And 70% is the one you want rather than the 90, since the stronger bottle flashes off so quickly on warm glass that you lose the working time you need for the buff. Cornstarch from the baking aisle at about $2 a box, which is the part nobody expects and the part that makes the whole thing work. And a spray bottle, plus 2 cloths. And I'll be specific about the cloths later because that turns out to matter more than any of this. The mix is 2 cups of water, half a cup of rubbing alcohol, a quarter cup of white vinegar, and 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and that fills an ordinary spray bottle with a little room to spare. Use distilled or previously boiled water if your tap runs hard, since putting mineral-heavy water onto glass and then letting it dry is precisely the problem you're trying to solve. And this is the single most common reason a homemade mix disappoints somebody. Put the cornstarch in first with a little of the water and stir it into a smooth slurry before adding the rest, because dry cornstarch dropped into a full bottle will clump and then block the sprayer, which will have you convinced the recipe is no good inside of a minute. Shake it hard before every single use, and I mean every use, because cornstarch does not dissolve and it will settle to the bottom within about 20 minutes of sitting still. And if the sprayer does block on you, warm water and a pin through the nozzle clears it in a moment rather than meaning the bottle is finished. Label the bottle, keep it out of reach of children, and keep it away from open flame while you're using it, since rubbing alcohol is genuinely flammable, and that's worth remembering around a wood stove or a pilot light. Now, the cornstarch, since that's the part everybody asks about and the part that sounds like superstition. It isn't dissolving and it isn't reacting with anything. It's suspended in the liquid as an enormous number of very fine, very soft particles, and those particles do 2 jobs at once. They give you an extremely mild abrasive, far too soft to scratch glass, but firm enough to break up a film that a plain liquid would only slide across. And as the water evaporates, they absorb and carry the loosened residue with them instead of letting it dry back down onto the pane. And the reason it cannot scratch is simply that a grain of starch is far softer than glass, which is the same reason you could scour a window with a handful of flour and do it no harm whatsoever. Then you buff them off with a dry cloth and they take the residue away with them, which is the bit people can't quite believe until they see a window come up clear on the first pass. It's the same principle as the old habit of using a little whiting or a chalky paste on glass, which people did for a very long time before anybody sold a spray. If you want to test it fairly, do half a window with the cornstarch in the mix and half without, and you'll see the difference along the joint. Now here's the half of this that almost nobody mentions, and it matters more than which liquid you use. You need 2 cloths, 1 damp for cleaning and 1 bone dry for buffing, and the dry buff is not optional. It's the step that turns a wet window into a clean one. Use lint-free cotton, an old flour sack towel, a well-washed cotton huck towel, or a good microfiber cloth, and whatever you choose, it must never have been washed with fabric softener or dried with a dryer sheet. And if you're buying microfiber for this, the tight flat weave sortment for glass beats the thick fluffy sortment for dusting, which sheds and leaves lint of its own behind. That's the single most common reason people's windows streak, and it's a genuinely maddening one, because the wax coating that makes a towel feel soft transfers straight onto glass and no amount of scrubbing will fix a cloth that's carrying it. Wash your glass cloths on their own in hot water with a little washing soda and no softener at all. Hang them to dry, and keep them separate from the rest of the laundry so nobody helpfully softens them for you. Do that one thing, and a great many people find their streaking problem disappears without changing the cleaner at all. Then there's the sun, which is the other half of the streaking problem and the one people blame themselves for. A window in direct sunlight is warm enough that your spray starts evaporating the instant it lands, which means it dries before you've had a chance to buff it, and dried cleaner is exactly what a streak is made of. So work the shaded side of the house and follow the shade round as the day moves, doing the east-facing glass in the afternoon and the west-facing in the morning, or do the whole job on an overcast day and enjoy yourself. If you've no choice and the sun is on the glass, work in sections of about 2 feet square rather than whole panes, and spray, wipe, and buff each section before moving to the next. And go lighter on the spray in the sun rather than heavier, which is the opposite of what instinct tells you to do. The other thing that gets blamed on technique is hard water, and this one is worth separating out because it needs a different answer. If your outside glass has a chalky white spotting on it that doesn't wipe away, particularly on the panes nearest a sprinkler or under a dripping gutter, that's mineral deposit rather than dirt, and it has bonded to the surface rather than sitting on it. Wiping harder will not shift it, and neither will the mix above, because the acid content is too dilute for the job. Wet a cloth with neat white vinegar, lay it flat against the glass, and leave it 15 minutes so the acid has time to dissolve the mineral. Then wipe and rinse and clean normally, and warming the vinegar a little first speeds it up noticeably, since that reaction runs faster at temperature the same way most of them do. If the spotting has been building for years, you may need to repeat that twice, and the same soak works on a shower door, which is generally the worst affected glass in any house. A word on a mix-up that catches people, because two of these ingredients look interchangeable and are not. Vinegar and ammonia both clean glass, and they are not the same thing and must not be treated as such, since ammonia is far harsher, needs real ventilation, and will damage some window films and some paint. More importantly, neither vinegar nor ammonia may ever go near chlorine bleach, because both combinations release toxic gas, and that's a hospital matter rather than a bad smell. Keep the bleach in another cupboard entirely, and never mix a cleaner of any sort with another cleaner, whatever the internet tells you about combining strengths. And keep in mind that the alcohol in this mix is flammable while it's wet, so no smoking, no candles, and good airflow while you work. It's worth knowing that glass cleaner as a separate bottle on its own shelf is not an old product. For most of the time people have had windows, they clean them with water, a little vinegar, and whatever cloth or paper was to hand, and the results were perfectly good because the chemistry involved is genuinely simple. The bottled spray arrived in the middle of the last century along with a great many other single-purpose household products, sold on convenience and on the idea that a specialist tool must beat a general one. What changed was not that vinegar and alcohol stopped cleaning glass. It's that nobody can own vinegar, and there's no profit in advertising a thing your competitor sells from the same shelf at the same price. While we're here, a few things people take as given about windows that don't hold up. Newspaper works, but it worked better in the days of high rag paper and oil-based ink, and modern newsprint is softer, and the ink comes off on your hands and sometimes onto the frame, so a cotton cloth is the better tool now. More cleaner does not clean better. It leaves more residue to buff off, and most people use 3 or 4 times what a pane needs. Squeegees are excellent on large panes and outside glass and rather awkward on small divided lights, so use one where it suits and don't force it. And the trick with a squeegee is to wipe the blade dry on a cloth at the end of every single pull, since a wet blade simply lays the water back down again on the next stroke. And a window that looks clean when wet tells you nothing at all, since every window looks clean when wet, which is why the dry buff is where the actual judgment happens. The disposable glass wipes sold in a tub deserve a word, since they're the most expensive way to clean a window that I'm aware of. You're buying a non-woven cloth, mostly water, a little alcohol, and a preservative to stop the tub going off, and you're throwing the cloth away after one pane, and the tub itself dries out if the lid isn't seated properly every time, which turns the bottom third of it into something you'll put in the bin and used. Work out the cost by the pane rather than by the tub, and you'll find them running several times what the spray does, and they leave more residue rather than less, because there's no dry buff anywhere in how they're meant to be used. They're genuinely convenient for a single fingerprint on a door, and that's about the honest limit of what I'd say for them. Now let me be honest about where this falls short, the same way I was honest about the title. Keep this well away from aftermarket window tint film, which is the surface I mentioned at the start, because the alcohol will haze and eventually lift the film, and that's a costly mistake on a vehicle or a tinted door. I'd keep it off eyeglasses and off any screen with an anti-glare or anti-reflective coating, since alcohol strips those coatings and they don't come back. On very heavily greased glass, the sort you get above a stove after a winter of frying, this mix will need 2 passes where a strong degreaser would need 1, so wash that pane with hot soapy water first, and then use this to finish. And the cornstarch does mean you must shake the bottle, and it does mean an occasional blocked sprayer, which is a small nuisance I'd rather tell you about now than have you discover on a ladder. A few habits alongside the mix make as much difference as the mix does. Wash the frames and sills first with soapy water and let them dry, because dirt from a frame runs down onto clean glass the moment it gets wet, and you'll be doing the paint twice. And the corners of a frame are where the grit collects, so a dry brush round the edges before you put any water near it saves you the worst of that. Do the inside with your strokes going one way and the outside with them going the other, up and down inside and side to side outside. So when you spot a streak later, you know instantly which side of the glass it's on. Do windows on a cool, overcast day whenever the weather offers you one, since that single choice removes most of the difficulty from the job. And keep one dry buffing cloth folded in quarters and refold it to a clean face as it loads up, rather than using one cloth face for a whole house full of windows. I'll tell you honestly why this one matters to me. Rebecca did the windows in this house every spring for years, and every spring she came away from it a bit frustrated. In the notebook, she kept had window cleaner on it 4 or 5 times a year without either of us ever thinking about it. The spring she ran out mid-job and mixed something from the cupboard rather than driving into town. The glass came up clearer than it had in the entire time we'd lived here, and she was more annoyed than pleased about it. What got her was not the money, which was small. It was the 20 years of thinking she was doing it badly when she'd been handed a bottle whose own residue was the thing making the streaks. That's the part one keep coming back to across all of these, that the product creates the problem it's sold to solve, and nobody has to lie to anybody for that to happen. So here's what to expect, honestly. The first window you do with this may still streak, because you're cleaning off the built-up residue of every bottle that came before it. And it's the second cleaning where the glass comes up properly clear, which catches people out badly enough that I'd rather you heard it from me now than decided after a single paint that this doesn't work. The mix will look faintly cloudy in the bottle, and that's the cornstarch doing its job, so don't let it worry you and don't strain it out. Your windows won't smell of anything afterward, and you'll notice the absence for about a week before it stops registering. And on the money, a bottle of blue cleaner runs about $4, and a household gets through 4 or 5 a year, so call it $20. Against a mix that costs roughly 70 cents to make and needs about 6 batches a year, which is $4 and change including the cloth you'll wash rather than throw out. So here's what I'd ask you to do this week. Mix 1 bottle using the ratio I gave you, cornstarch stirred into a slurry first, and do a single window with it rather than committing to the whole house. Before you do, check what your glass cloths have been washed in, and if there's any chance they've met a dryer sheet, run them through hot with a spoonful of washing soda and no softener first. Then do half a pane with the 2-cloth method and half with just the damp cloth. And look at the join in bright light, because that comparison will tell you more than the rest of this video did. Tell me in the comments whether your water runs hard where you are, and whether you needed distilled water to get this working properly, because that's the variable I'm asked about most, and it changes county to county. And if you've got a window that's been spotted white for years, try the neat vinegar soak on one pane and tell me how long you had to leave it. I'd genuinely like to know how bad it gets in places with harder water than ours. If the yard's been more trouble than the windows this summer, my brother Samuel has a wasp trap over on his channel that costs about what a bottle of glass cleaner does and lasts the whole season. Next time here we're getting into the toilet bowl and the ring that keeps coming back no matter what you scrub it with, which turns out not to be dirt at all and explains why the blue gel was never going to shift it. Until then, mix a bottle, check what your cloths have been washed in, and give the dry buff a proper go before you decide anything. Most of what's under your sink for cleaning glass right now, you were taught you needed it. You weren't.